Okay, thank you, Ralph. All right, everyone, welcome to the February 9th, 2026 meeting of the Land Use, Transportation, and Public Safety Committee of the Montgomery County House Delegation. We have one item on the agenda today, which is our continued discussion of MC 10-26. We have Delegate Foley, the sponsor of the bill, here with us to help us with our discussion and answer any questions. We have a number of amendments that have been presented for consideration. My hope is that we'll have a good discussion, work through these amendments, hopefully be ready to make some final votes on amendments and maybe advance the bill today because we are moving along in the calendar of session and we need to take some action on this bill. We also have a couple of representatives with us on the call from the Montgomery County Automated Traffic Enforcement Division. We have Director Tippery, who has joined us for past discussions of this bill. And we also have David Smolsky, who is here on behalf of one of the vendors that provides these types of automated enforcement systems and crosswalks to answer any technical questions. And of course, we have our committee counsel and staff with us here to help as well. So with that, I guess it makes sense to try to take some of these amendments in the order in which they were received and circulated to the committee. Some of them are going to be easier than others. So the first one that we have in front of us, I believe, is one from Delegate Foley to remove the limitation to school zones. And bear in mind, there are other amendments that will be in front of us shortly this afternoon to limit the scope of the systems to a pilot, to limit the number of years of that pilot, and to limit the number of locations of that pilot. So should think about those in conjunction with the removal of language that would otherwise limit these systems to school zones. Any comments or questions about that? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Delegate Moon.
Well, I guess how many amendments are there total?
So, I mean, this depends on, I know that you have a new amendment. This depends on whether your new amendment supersedes your previous draft amendment or whether they should be considered separately.
Well, if I may, it seems to me that the amendments do work together. Certainly on Delegate Foley's amendment immediately before us to remove the school restriction. I'm not opposed to that. Although in another way, we could also just discuss the amendments in toto and then figure out how to sort them. But I leave it to you.
No, that may
Either way seems fine.
that may make more sense, particularly since they work together and sort of rely on each other. We don't want to have this weird kind of process where, we've passed one amendment, assuming another one's going to pass and not know what might happen with that second amendment. I do see committee counsel raising her hand. Sam, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of first emphasize the bill actually already sunsets after 5 years, so we don't need to amend and add that in there. So that's just something to note. And then yeah, beyond that, kind of the amendments that it seems the school zone amendment, the removing the term complete, making it the information security, and I believe there's one more simple topic that we had talked about a lot. Yeah, school zone limitation, the signage proximate to the system. Those are all can work with any of the amendments that whether you adopt the pilot House Spiegel or Moon's amendment. And then also within that, Delegate Moon's new amendment is an edited version of his first one. So that helps.
So I just want to make sure Delegate Moon agrees with that, oh, it looks like did we lose him? Oh, they're still there. That he agrees with that the new version of his amendment that was circulated today, earlier today, doesn't need to be considered separately from the previous version of his amendment that was circulated last week. Are you okay with that, Delegate Moon?
To replace the amendment?
Yeah, I mean, we'll
Yes.
have this
Yes.
discussion. I like your
Yes.
suggestion. We'll have this discussion sort of collectively of all these elements, and then we can decide what to act on at the end of the discussion. Um, I know Delegate Foley wanted to weigh in on an issue, or if this is a question, but Delegate Foley, please, as the sponsor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question, and I do want to weigh in on the amendments when you think it's the proper time. But my question is, and I apologize, I unfortunately had to miss the last meeting of this committee discussion on this bill. I thought there was did you already adopt an amendment to make the bill conform with all the privacy regulations no?
We haven't voted on any of the amendments yet, but that language is in one of the more simple amendments, I believe,
Okay.
that Sam just mentioned.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we include that in whatever bill we pass. That's, so you didn't mention that, so I wanted to ask that question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that's what she meant by information security when she mentioned information security. Vice Chair Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the sunset clause. How can that work out? Because, for example, if the county purchase devices and instruments, then they're working with the vendors. The vendor didn't get the money back in 5 years. Like, what's going to do? Or if everything paid out, what are we going to do with the instruments, every system we're having after 5 years? What does sunset mean here?
I don't know if Mr. Smolsky or Mr. Tippery wants to answer that question, but I'll just say at the outset, my understanding from the vendor was that they indicated that if the pilot was going to be limited in terms of years, 3 to 5 years would be the minimum amount to make this financially viable. So 5 years would make it financially, at least theoretically, financially viable for vendors to be able to do this. I don't know who actually owns the equipment. I don't know if the vendor just leases it to the county or how that works.
I'm not as familiar. I don't know that. I think that depends on what kind of arrangement the vendor makes with the county. The reason for the vendor is okay. Avio would be one of the vendors would be okay with the sunset is because stop sign cameras are sunsetted in 5 years also. So in 2014, when the General Assembly passed stop sign legislation for Prince George's County only, that was a 5-year termination date. And then a year later, Baltimore City was added to that in Tacoma Park. And I know you've already considered some legislation adding Rockville and Gaithersburg to the stop sign camera bill. So a 5-year sunset would be fine because that's what they're living with under the stop sign camera bill. And that should be enough time for them to get up and running, get the contracts done, and then start having revenues come in.
So I think the question is here, do they have an assumption already the camera or the speeding camera or this crosswalk camera will be continued after the sunset? Is that their default assumption?
Well, it would be a pilot, and the pilot would terminate. I think if the program is successful, you'll all be back, eliminating the sunset program to continue the program after that. But I think the whole point of the sunset is to see how these things work, and is pedestrian safety enhanced by these devices. And again, 5 years should be ample enough time to make this determination. If it's a successful program, you'll all be back in 5 years, maybe hopefully eliminating that termination provision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So sort of what I'll consider the low-hanging fruit here. We'll turn to some of the potentially more detailed discussions of some of the elements in my amendments and Delegate Moon's amendments in a minute. But assuming that we are limiting this to a 5-year pilot, which seems to already sort of be in the language of the existing bill, everybody seems comfortable removing the restriction on school zone limitations, as long as other provisions sort of otherwise limiting this to a pilot, which we'll discuss in a moment, are imposed per the will of the committee. Everybody seems okay removing the school zone limitation. Seeing no objections to that. The amendment that removed the word completes in front of stop was designed to ensure that our description of activity that would trigger a citation under the automated system matches the activity described in other parts of the transportation code in terms of what you are and are not allowed to do when you approach a crosswalk and you're in a vehicle. So the word complete just doesn't appear in the original portion of the transportation code. So that's why that was removed. If anybody has like strong objection to that, speak now. But I think everybody understands that we're just trying to align whatever gets you a ticket under this system with what is currently under the law unlawful to do when you approach a crosswalk. The privacy provision that was mentioned earlier basically just makes sure that this pilot and these types of systems for crosswalks are expressly called out in the separate section of the code that talks about protecting the privacy of individuals and the privacy of data collected. So this already applies to every sort of traffic enforcement, automated traffic enforcement system in the state. And it probably would already apply to the crosswalk system, even if we didn't call it out expressly. But just to be extra careful, this would add automated crosswalk enforcement to that list of other types of automated enforcement that would be covered by the existing privacy law. So I suspect there's no concerns about that. Let me know if you feel otherwise. And then the signage provision would simply require that instead of having a sign when you first enter Montgomery County that says, beware, we use automated crosswalk cameras, there would also be, much like there are for speed cameras, there would be signage in proximity to where the crosswalk cameras are saying you're entering a zone where there's a crosswalk camera. So we just did that to be consistent with the way we do it for speed enforcement for automated systems for speeding. Any concerns or questions about the substance of those pieces of the amendments that are before us? Okay, so the parts that we need to work through and have a conversation about that we started to talk about last week, I had a conversation with our delegation chair and with some of the Senate members of our delegation and had looked at some prior bills that we passed on other types of automated enforcement, stop signs, speed cameras, et cetera, and even the noise cameras that we recently passed a pilot for. And I walked away with the impression that in order to ensure that this pilot program can go forward without a lot of objection from our friends in the Senate, that it needs to have a numerical limitation, at least for purposes of the pilot. So based on some of the numbers of the limitations in some of these other pilots for other types of enforcement, I made a educated conclusion and used 30 locations as a number of locations to start with the pilot. Hopefully enough to be able to demonstrate the significance of this technology and to be able to benefit from it over the course of the pilot period, while still making sure that our Senate colleagues are not concerned that it's going to be, overused or at every single intersection or anything like that. I'm open to discussion about that, but that's just by way of background how I ended up with the amendment that proposes that as part of the pilot, we limit the location to 30 locations around the county to be determined by, local officials at the county and at the municipal governments. I guess they'll have to coordinate on all of that. Any thoughts or comments or questions about that piece of it? Delegate Moon.
Really, I just am curious how the number 30 lines up with the number for stop signs and school bus and the speed cameras when we rolled them in. And with this, similar to speed cameras, will there be an articulable criteria that can, because what happens with the speed cameras is everyone wants them everywhere. And and so now we've got local governments lobbying us not to loosen or whatever because they already have a lot of requests that they don't think not me, they don't think are warranted. And so I guess I would like to get ahead of that if at all possible.
Yeah, and I don't know if Mr. Tippery wants to weigh in on that, but I mean, look, we all know that our local governments at the county and municipal level have processes in place to determine where they're going to locate speed cameras already. I don't know that those are mandated by law. They might just be, or mandated by state law. They might just be something that the counties and the municipalities do to manage that process. So if that's something that they can do on their own to manage that process and manage public input, maybe we don't need to put it in state legislation. But Mr. Tippery, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, you're exactly right. We do an enormous amount of research before we place a system, crash data analysis, and Avio's already been in the county a couple times doing some research on locations inside of our central business districts that would be important for us to pay attention to. But everything we do as far as speed cameras, red light cameras, and of course this technology would all be data driven. And we report out on that data.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Does this language contemplate crosswalks that are wholly on county roads, or can it be a combination county-state or fully state?
Well, I mean, there is another piece of amendment language that's been put forward that basically removes the provision requiring the county council to approve every location, but requires if SHA wants to put a system on a state road within the county, they still have to get the county council's approval, but the county council doesn't need to approve every county road location or municipal location.
Well, here's why I ask, because
Yeah.
as you know, one of my coming attractions is an amendment about the money and the use of the money. And so my next question is, let's say we want to restripe, install pylons and a pedestrian island. We want to put up a hawk or a beacon, or signage. Does whether the crosswalk is wholly, partly, or not at all contained on a state highway change who has the ability to install those safety features? Who has the ability to install a hawk or a pedestrian crossing or pylons at a crosswalk that is like on Rockville Pike, say, or 650 or something like that? Does the county have the ability to do that?
My understanding is the county would do all that. If it was a state highway, you would have to get permission from SHA, and they would issue permission to put it on a state road, but otherwise it would be all driven by the locality.
I see Mr. Holland shaking his head. Do you want to weigh in, sir?
Yeah, it's not just a permission. It's got to be, for the system, it has to be permitted because, just as we can't do anything in the state intersection, they own that. So if they permit us to put in the intersection, that would be that. They'd also approve the signage, locations, all that good stuff. And then in terms of any improvements that are identified, if we were to pay for it, again, we would still, and we also as a county do improvements on state facilities, like for bike projects that go through a state intersection. Same thing, they would permit that, and then we would be working with them to get that implemented.
So again, if we have a crosswalk camera set up on New Hampshire Ave, fully state highway, and we collect $200,000 of tickets in a year, and we say, all right, we want to spend that on improvements here. We don't need to change anything in law. You already have the ability to take that 100,000 and get a hawk put up there.
I mean, it would still be at the discretion of the state. We could say like, hey, state, we have money to do this. If they don't agree, that's the solution. We would have to work with them to make that, and potentially maintenance as well would have to be decided. But we already do that. That's already existing processes for us to spend money on the state through the permitting process and any sort of MOUs to work through any of those issues.
Okay, because I was going to say, if it is a problem, then I would want the pilot to be solely on county roads where there was the ability to install these features. But if you're saying the existence of it being a state road is not an actual real world impediment to safety features going in there, then I don't mind there being a more expansive pilot that includes state highways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Thanks. I see Delegate Stewart has his hand up. I'm sure Delegate Moon, you'll have some other questions as we go through, but Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I just want to make because I haven't really weighed in broadly on this yet. I just want to weigh in here that I see crosswalk cameras as distinct from a lot of the other kind of cameras that we've dealt with and that I used to deal with in my previous subcommittee and committee, which is that I think that whereas red light cameras and speed cameras and certainly noise cameras and stop sign cameras, et cetera, they all essentially are trying to protect people from possible harm. We're trying to enforce theoretical rules that could theoretically harm someone. And I still support, obviously, all those types of technology. Crosswalk cameras, and I understand the technology is new, et cetera, to me, strikes me as the most legitimate form of speed camera technology because it's the most unassailable, because it actually is protecting someone from immediate, imminent harm. Like there is a designed place where we have told pedestrians to cross. There is literally a pedestrian, and if the person does not abide by the law and stop, someone could very easily die. Whereas most of the times, and not to say that we shouldn't have speed cameras, but most of the times that people go 37 and a 25, they're not immediately at risk of killing anyone else. And that's why drivers view sometimes, I think wrongly, but sometimes view speed camera technology as some sort of revenue grab or cash grab. So I just want to say that like broadly. So maybe someone's already made that point, but like I think we're really talking about an exciting technology here. I really like the bill, and I like it because this to me is the kind of technology that very clearly is not any kind of revenue grab whatsoever and is designed to protect the most vulnerable people against a very heavy, very terrifying, and very dangerous machine that's coming at them. So I just want to make that point first. Secondly, with that said, my question is, how many cameras, is it always one camera per location? Because with this amendment with the 30 camera cap or 30 location cap, I just want to make sure that we're not actually going to end up with like 15 or 20 locations if we adopt that, because sometimes you need 2 cameras per location. That's just like an empirical technology question for anyone who can answer it.
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Smolsky knows the technical details of how these systems work, but if you can call upon or text someone while we're having this meeting and see if you can get an answer to that. I can tell you, Delegate Stewart, it's a good point. My intention with the 30 location cap was to cap the number of locations or crosswalks, not the number of cameras to be used. So if that's not clear in the amendment, that's my intention in the amendment.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we could probably wordsmith it a little bit and make it somewhat more clear, but that's not something that we have to do today. We could probably do that in full committee if we get an answer back from our friends at the technology company. Sometimes these do have 2 cameras. I think we probably could tighten up the language slightly just to ensure that we do have 30 distinct locations. My next question is, because I have to admit, I'm not a fan of these arbitrary numerical caps, because the studies I've read suggest that you get that halo effect of deterrence when you actually do have a critical mass of cameras, because then it's less about, oh, I know there's a crosswalk camera there, so I'm just going to make sure I abide that one. And it's more like, man, these things could be everywhere. I need to actually just start stopping for pedestrians. So I don't like caps. I will say that. At the same time, I like passing bills, and I'll totally respect the chair's point about how some of our friends on the other side of the street or on the other side of the hall don't necessarily share my passion for camera technology. And so I understand that we sometimes have to be pragmatic. My request would be, and of course they're happy to amend it out and we can go to conference or, however that process works for chambers. My request would be to keep the 30 cap, but to say perhaps if there was evidence that the program was working in some way, that midway through the pilot, for example, because they have to promulgate these evaluations. If it seems like we actually have greater deterrence, if it seems like fewer people are dying in crosswalks, or whatever method we want to use, to give the county the ability to increase that to some other amount within the 5-year span without having to come back to Annapolis. That would be my suggestion, if possible. And if the Senate hates that, the Senate hates that, but at least we still have a cap.
Thank you for that. Appreciate the suggestion. I will say that in our earlier discussions in this committee about this bill in general, it seems that the committee in general is supportive of the use of this technology. It's really about questions about the details here. So I take your point very well your first point that you made, Delegate Stewart. And I think, without trying to speak for everyone on the committee, I think we're all on the same page about that. But this technology is new. No other state has adopted it yet. And I think that's why we're trying to make sure that we construct the final version of this bill that moves out of this committee in a way that will survive the vagaries of the legislative process and be pragmatic, as you said, Delegate Stewart. So with that, we'll see if we can get an answer on the question of the number of cameras per location.
I'm asking right now.
Okay, thank you. And then, one question that came up that I know Delegate Foley wanted to weigh in on was, as the bill is currently written, does it only allow for these systems to be located at true intersections, or does it also allow for mid-block crosswalks to have these systems located there if, under the parameters that we set, the county decides, for example, that it wants to put a system in a mid-block crosswalk? Does anybody know the answer to that question? I'm not sure I saw language that limited us to only, intersections, but Delegate Foley, I don't know if you want to weigh in here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think the bill as submitted limits us to intersections only. I hope it doesn't, because I'm strongly in favor of the bill, because in my district, unlike some of these other roads we've been discussing, it's mostly mid-block crosswalks that are a problem. I was more concerned, and maybe we can wait till we get to the amendments. I was more concerned about the improvements at crosswalks that was specified in the bill. So the amendment, I mean.
Maybe I misunderstood the question you had raised earlier. Okay. All right. Any other comments before we get to some of the other details of the newer amendments that were circulated? Delegate Moon.
I mean, these kinds of questions really, they're big questions. A mid-block cross and a intersection are two totally different environments. And I would just, again, point back to the fund restrictions I'm talking about. I mean, a mid-block crossing, I can point to tons of them that nobody respects in my district. And almost all of them have 0 pedestrian island, 0 beacon. You know what I mean? Like they don't have any of those engineering treatments. I have one giant corridor in my district where the county went and put them throughout Dale Drive. They went and installed pylons and striping and mid-block crossings throughout all of those mid-block crosswalks over there, unsignalized. And I have not really seen that anywhere else in my district. And so, again, I think these questions are all related. And the bigger and less defined the pilot type is, I think we start to really bump into more questions here. So I'll just flag it, but I don't particularly have a problem with mid-block versus not. But I am just pointing out these are wildly different scenarios to be trying to do this in, and the public education I think will be very different too, at a signalized cross that people are disobeying versus an not well-defined mid-block crossing that really could speak to a lot of engineering treatments. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you. Sam, committee counsel.
Yeah, Delegate Foley, are you looking at the part in the amendment that requires the money to go to infrastructure enhancements at intersections with crosswalks?
Yes.
Okay.
But I don't want to get ahead of the committee.
Just so like the conversation and in general, that specifically is what we're talking about when we go to Delegate Moon's amendment on like where the funding goes, but it doesn't prohibit the monitoring system from being put in place at a mid-system crosswalk. It's just that specific language as drafted directs the funding to go to those enhancements at intersection crosswalks.
Correct. If I may, Mr. Chair, I understand that, which is
just wanted to make sure that that was clear across the board.
This was a private discussion with the chair, and he just misunderstood what I was referring to. The main bill, the bill as I submitted it, applies to crosswalks, whether they're at intersections or mid-block crosswalks. My comment was about my district, where most of the problems are with respect to mid-block crosswalks.
Got it. Appreciate all the clarifications. So with that, that's maybe a good segue to talk about Delegate Moon's updated amendment and sort of maybe just go through it piece by piece and talk first about this provision regarding the revenues, which in the updated version of his proposed amendment, which was circulated this morning, similar to the original version that was circulated last week, basically says that the fines collected from the violations after paying for, the costs, I guess, to the vendor and the cost to administer the program, the additional revenue collected by the county would then be used or dedicated for use to improve safety at those intersections that have the monitoring systems. And there's a list in his amendment of a number of, I don't think it's an exhaustive list, Delegate Moon, right? I think it's just sort of an exemplary list of the types of systems that could be paid for with the revenue that is collected by these systems. Things like hawk signals, beacons, pylons, pedestrian push buttons, raised crosswalks, and other types of features that could improve the safety at those locations once we have more data collected about what's happening at those locations. Delegate Moon, you want to add anything else about that provision within your amendment before we get into a discussion about it?
Yes, I feel very strongly, the more I've had the weekend to think on this, and I feel quite strongly that we do this. And here's the reason why. I'm already suspicious of some of the arguments I'm hearing from folks about. So I had asked earlier whether we could have these cameras co-installed with beacons and hawks. And the vendor or someone sent back message that that would be cost prohibitive and that the cost of a beacon or a hawk is somewhere in the 80 to 150K range. So that was an interesting data point for many reasons. And secondly, I started getting the request from the county to just allow it to be spent on crosswalk safety generally anywhere in the county, not necessarily at a place with a camera. And that is the part that I'm definitely opposed to, because that's basically how we've rolled out every other automated enforcement pilot. And it leads to the situation that I don't like, which the county's already talking about, where we have a persistent offense location and we spend $0 at that location. And in this instance, it would be because the county predetermined that there's no engineering treatments to improve here, that the problem is solely driver behavior. And I can look at that and say, all right, be that as it may, I don't care. I want, after 4 or 5 years of revenue building there, I want that to be the most ridiculously safe looking crosswalk in the world with blinking lights and raised crosswalks and pylons and everything, even if the county is telling me that they think those are unnecessary. Because if that is a high offense location and the condition persists, it's galling to me that we would essentially be using that as a revenue funnel elsewhere in the county for crosswalk safety. But that just leads to general funding of that money. And, we could design an elaborate system where we count year-over-year dollars to see whether there's an additional expenditure on crosswalk safety from the revenue bump. But again, this is a repeat of the bus patrol situation where you have a $500,000 school bus stop and 0 of those dollars are being spent to make that school bus stop safer, even though the condition persists year after year. And now that the sponsor is indicating and intends to include mid-block crossings, which I agree are a huge problem in my district too. But one of the big problems in my district is we've been banging the drum to get State Highway to put engineering improvements at many mid-block crossings in my district, and there's never any money for it. So here's the pilot I would propose. We do the 5 years, we do 30 locations, and the pilot is we're creating a control group versus every other system we've done where we just give the county the revenue from these photo enforcement. What if the pilot is, what happens when the county is forced to spend the revenue on safety upgrades at the locations generating the revenue. And the flexibility I'm willing to give here is, all right, fine. You don't have to do it at this one or the highest count or whatever. But my God, 30 locations, can it be at one of the 30? Any of the 30? It just seems crazy that none of those 30 could use any engineering treatment. And we're being told they won't put in beacons and hawks from the onset. So either we define super well where these things are going, and then you can have the money because we know that money won't be well spent there, or you get it loosey-goosey like you want, but then the money must be spent at those locations. And if after 5 years you've proven that that was a waste of time, then I will come back hat in hand and we can redo the program with the money general funded. But I absolutely object to us starting from the position that we're assuming none of this money is going to be well spent at the 30 locations with the problem. So with that, I do want to make sure that we have the ability to spend it at combined state, county, or all state locations. And here's the other piece of it. This probably means we do need a special fund, and I understand people don't like that, but perhaps we allow the funds to build up. And after 2 years or 3 years or something like that, we come back together and we talk about this again. But something like this, I think, needs to be there. And if there's a decision to not spend any of the money at the 30 locations where this pilot is occurring, I think that needs to be a recorded vote. And I think county officials need to be on the record saying that they think it's not useful to spend money at the locations that have high offenses. So that is sort of how I've begun to feel about this pilot and how we construct it.
Okay. Thank you for that, Delegate Moon. Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess on the Moon amendment, first, let me just say that I agree with Delegate Moon. I've always agreed with him on this issue. I've always supported him, including in my previous role, trying to allocate as much revenue as we can to the existing problem. I think it just makes these programs more durable from a political standpoint. I think if the public sees us allocating the revenues back into the structural improvements to the roads, they understand what we're doing here. And I think that they're willing to give us a lot more latitude so we don't have to do things like cap the program at 30 cameras. So I'm with him, whether that takes a special fund or anything. I'm going to be casting my vote in the direction of however we end up crafting this towards allocating the money to actual structural improvements to these parts of the roadway. However, my second point is I strongly agree with where I believe that Delegate Foley was going, which is that we should not limit the allocation to intersections because mid-block crossings are actually far, far more deadly than intersections are. Only 25% of pedestrian crashes occur at intersections. The rest of the 75% occur outside intersections. So if we were going to do a pilot focusing on one of those two things, in particular, intersections or not intersections, we'd actually be wise if we had to choose between the two of them, choose non-intersections and make this a pilot about 30 mid-block crossings, and let's try to allocate the money and get hawk signals up as soon as we can out of a special fund. I think that's the direction where we should go. And let me throw one more bomb as my third point into this equation. And I think this makes it more helpful in terms of Delegate Moon's utopian vision here. I think $40 is way too low for this fine. That's what the speed camera fine was for going 12 over. That's something like 5 times less than the $250 or more than the $250 fine for school buses, which is again a theoretical harm, as Delegate Moon has pointed out, more than an imminent harm. And if you get cited for a crosswalk violation by a cop, you're going to get a $75 to $80 fine, plus you're going to get a point at the minimum. If you harm someone or you almost harm someone or you startle someone, you can get up to $500. And I would argue that that's a less objective, that's just going off the police officer's sight of basically how egregious it was. Here, we're going to have an objective violation recorded by a camera of someone almost dying, or in some cases, we're going to record someone actually dying. And we're going to slap them with a $40 fine at most. Like, listen, like I understand there's a lot of skepticism around cameras and fines. And I get emails too from people that complain about this stuff. And we just did the tiered fine system. And I know some people didn't love that. But I think that we could achieve the utopian moon vision of having hawk signals at the worst mid-block intersections in the county a lot easier. The math would math a lot faster if we did not limit ourselves to a fine that is, I think, higher or lower than the fine for chewing gum and putting it somewhere in public. I can't, I mean, I understand the politics and the pragmatism of this, but I find it startling. I mean, I have my whole little book of fines. This would be one of the lowest fines for anything on the roadway. And it's like literally you almost killing someone. So anyway, that's me on my soapbox, but I would vote I would vote in favor of increasing it to $80, which is what you would get in the real world from a police officer. I like the 5 years. I'm cool with the 30 cameras, but let's try to allocate an increased portion of revenue towards fixing the problem.
Thank you. And I think a lot of this discussion sort of emanates from the word choice in the drafting of Delegate Moon's amendment that in Section 8, discussing, the dedication of the revenue, uses the word intersections. It seems to me that Delegate Moon was not intending for it to be limited to, quote, intersections, but rather to improve safety at any crosswalk where the crosswalk monitoring systems are. So that should be easy enough to fix just by replacing the word intersections, which happens to appear in Section 8 of his amendment. Our committee counsel is giving me the thumbs up, and I think that should be easy enough to fix. To the question about, how much the fine should be, that's certainly something we can revisit. I am a little concerned that if we start opening up that to a whole new conversation at this point, I don't want us to spend another week or two debating this bill before it starts to move. And I know Delegate Stewart understands that, but I do take your point. And I will also mention that, of course, in the most egregious cases, God forbid somebody gets really injured or killed in one of these crosswalks with a camera, there are other charges that can be brought against the driver apart from violating the crosswalk. So that can certainly be enforced with harsher penalties through that. But I do take your point. And maybe that's something that if we do move this bill, we can upgrade it in a year and increase based on the data, what the fines ought to be or something like that. But again, I think this is a matter of going back to our discussion about the pragmatism of trying to get the bill passed. So any other discussion about the revenue dedication provision? Delegate Moon.
Just a question, whether this requires a special fund or not. I just don't know the mechanics of how we flow money, especially because I just don't know how much money is going to come in the door on the first instance. Like if we need to pool the money over more than a year, does that require a fund? How does it? I don't know how this usually works.
Well, one of the questions I had in response to that is, does the money go to us to hold? Or does it flow through, the courts to the county to hold, and then the county would be required to spend it in the way that we mandate? So maybe it's a special fund within the county, so we don't have to administer it, but they still have to report to us, on what's in there. Mr. Holland maybe can answer that question.
Yeah, so the way that we currently track, we have the revenues that comes in, right, to pay the bills, and then we have the expenditures. Those are all kind of captured in different cost centers within the police department to be able to kind of track, speed camera versus red light versus schools, because they're on different contracts and different rules. So if we were to have this pilot, we just create some new cost centers to be able to track those expenditures and revenues as they come in.
So you could do that on your end once the money comes into you and be able to report to us what's in there. And of course, obviously, how you've spent it in line with whatever mandate we include in the state legislation.
Correct. So, like, for example, we have the new bill for the high energy network speed camera. So we're creating kind of a new workflow between police, finance, budget to be able to track and eventually take those net revenues and provide them to high energy network projects as required under the bill. So we can kind of piggyback on that example if this were to go and pass.
Any issue with those funds rolling over from year to year in terms of the county's budget process?
That is a good question. Yes, yeah. Usually, if it's not encumbered, we would have to ask our finance folks. Because usually, if it's not spent, if it's not in a certain fund or encumbered, it doesn't roll over. So we would have to go and check that.
Okay, so I think that's what Delegate Moon is suggesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, Delegate, but that these funds would be encumbered such that if you don't spend them in the budget year in which you receive them, they would roll over the course of the pilot to be used. You know, if you have a more expensive engineering treatment that you want for a certain intersection, and you're waiting till the amount in the fund builds up enough that you would be able to afford whatever it is you want to do there, a hawk signal or whatever, that you would be able to do that over time, rolling over those remaining funds from year to year. Of course, if you can do that through the county and we don't have to manage that process, even though we want transparency in the process and reporting, I think that would make our lives easier from an accounting perspective.
And I'll say too, I think it came out this way in the amendment, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I think I wrote the words too to be technology and engineering improvement, so that we wouldn't be like, oh, striping is included here and we only have $10,000. Let's I guess all we can afford is striping. I was trying to, guard against that, by indicating we are talking about treatments that maybe need more time to pool funds. And, anyway, there you go. For the legislative history, that is the intent.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Foley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Moon, I don't see that stipulation in your amendment. I am looking at it. So I just in response to what you just said, but I wanted to to assist the committee to on this issue of revenue generated. I just wanted to throw out some figures that I used in my testimony. So there has been, I mean, these cameras have been tested at 7 crosswalks across the county in Bethesda, Germantown, and Clarksburg for 2 to 4 hour increments. And just for some context, 376 pedestrians during that window were observed approaching, waiting, or crossing at the crosswalks, which is what the law requires. 615 vehicles failed to stop. So that's 615 violations in the 2 to 4 hour period at 7 crosswalks in Montgomery County. So I think in terms of generating revenue, that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of revenue that could be generated here. Now, granted, hopefully when people start to realize that they're going to get these fines, they'll stop violating the law. But I just thought that might be useful context for the committee. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I think no one here disagrees. There's an epidemic of, not properly acting when drivers approach a crosswalk. So that's why we're having this discussion. But I guess that's the point of the pilot. We'll find out how much it generates, and then we'll be able to make better decisions down the road. Any other points about the revenue? Because I wanted to ask about one other provision in Delegate Moon's amendment. And then what I'm going to do is suggest that even though it may not be perfect, given the timing relative to the session, I think we ought to consider moving some version of this bill out today. And then if we need to amend it either in full delegation or in standing committee, we can do that. But I think we're sort of coalescing around a vision for what this bill is supposed to be. And I just don't want us to be delaying the possibility of its passage. So I wanted to ask about Delegate Moon has a provision on page 3 of his updated version of his amendment, which talks about locations not requiring the approval of the county council if they've been identified using the county's existing methodology for determining where to implement enforcement measures. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Tippery or anybody else on the call if they had any thoughts on that, or if that language is okay and sort of captures the current process. I think the idea was we didn't want to have to go to the county council every single time traffic enforcement was going to select a location at the county level, or a municipality might want to do it. But if we are going to limit it to 30 locations around the county, there's going to need to be coordination between the municipalities and the county, of course, as to that allocation as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that language, Mr. Tippery, or if it's okay. I just wanted to make sure it doesn't raise any concerns.
No, I think it's okay. It doesn't raise any concerns in our office.
Great. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Everybody okay with us trying to vote on the amendments that we've discussed today in the fashion that we've discussed them? All right. Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also think we should pass this out today. However, I'm just gonna die on this hill. I know it's a little annoying. I know that it imperils the bill. I am going to move once we're done voting on the other amendments. I'm going to move an amendment to increase the fine to $65. And my rationale is we've already increased the minimum fine for work zone cameras to $80. Well, this $40 number comes initially from the speed camera program in 2006, which updated into $2,026 per inflation would be, you guessed it, $64.75. So if we just updated the $40, we'd be up to $65. This $40 fine is less than jaywalking is. It's also less than smoking marijuana in a public place, even though now marijuana is legal. Like this is $40 is like basically the most egregiously low penalty you could have. And I think it made sense in 2006 for going 12 miles over. I don't think it makes sense in 2026 for almost hitting someone. So I'm going to move an amendment after we're all done. You guys are welcome to vote it down. If it kills the bill in the Senate and we don't pass anything, Delegate Foley, you can blame me. I'll eat my hat. I think it's prudent. I really don't think that, given the direction we're doing with the tiered fines and the work zone cameras and all that, I really don't think $65 is too much.
Duly noted. Appreciate it. So let me just ask our committee counsel, can we vote on all these different issues in blocks, or should we vote on each amendment as it's been separately drafted?
We can vote on them in blocks. If you want, I can kind of just give you a overview of what I've gathered from this conversation that we've all agreed on so far.
Let's start with the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So we can just sort of vote collectively on that one.
Yeah.
Unless you want to just do them all at once. It seems like everybody is willing to do them all at once, right? Any opposition to that? All right. Yeah, just go through them all, Sam, and we'll make sure that they all reflect what we've discussed.
Okay. So first, everyone is okay with removing the school zone. Second, everyone's okay with removing complete in front of stop to make sure that's good. Everyone's okay with the privacy information. And then everyone's okay with proximate signage. I have a numerical limitation to 30 locations, not cameras, 30 locations. I have that the revenues should be used to improve safety at crosswalks with crosswalk systems, not specifically intersections. And those can include, like, the non-exhaustive including list, I think demonstrates Delegate Moon's point that it doesn't have to be that year if it's something that's more expensive. But I can check back in with my people to see if we need any language for it to roll over. And then the county council approval, if it's not within the current current ATE procedures, you have to get county council. But if it is within the current ATE location procedures, you don't have to get county council approval.
That sounds right, except the one thing I'll add to that last one is I had a separate amendment to remove county council approval altogether, except for when SHA wants to locate a camera on a state highway crosswalk within the county. And I also wanted to make sure that municipalities working together with county staff can locate a crosswalk camera in the municipality without getting county council approval.
Yes.
And is everybody okay with those? Seeing no objection to that. Okay. So with that list of amendments and reflecting some changes that we've made to the original written language of the amendments that Delegate Moon and Delegate Foley and I had put forward, is there a motion?
Move them all.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, I guess we have to vote for the amendments first, and then we'll vote for the full bill as amended. All in favor of that package of amendments, raise your hand or say aye. Any opposed? Okay, seeing no opposition, that passes unanimously. Is there a motion on the full bill as amended?
I'm going to move my $65 amendment.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about that. Right.
I second that.
All right, there's a second from Delegate Wu. Any further conversation on the Stewart amendment?
Just very quick back of the napkin math. Mr. Chair. I think Delegate Foley was indicating that the limited test they did looks like probably 50 tickets an hour, if the time spots are comparable. So at $65 a ticket, or at $3,250 an hour. So I think this is going to be big money, but I mean, I will support this.
Great. Any other comments about the Stewart amendment? All right. Seeing none, all in favor of the Stewart amendment, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? All right. Seeing none, that passes unanimously. Now, is there a motion on the bill as amended?
I move as amended.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any final discussion on the full bill as amended? All right. All in favor of the full bill as amended, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? All right, seeing none, that passes unanimously as amended too. Thank you all very much for a very important discussion. And I'm really happy with the work product we have. May not be 100% perfect, but I think we've really got something good here. And if we do need to make some tweaks in the full delegation or in the standing committee, there's the opportunity to do that. And I'm happy to work with all of you to make that happen, but really appreciate everybody's effort here. Thank you.
Thank you,
Right.
Mr. Chair.
All right, I think that's it. That's all we have on the agenda. And within an hour, we are adjourned. Thank you.